Good evening, and welcome to a calm look at what really happened when the Ice Age ended, which wasn't one big melt, but it quietly drowned coastlines people relied on, reshaping maps and minds. Tonight, the planet is a thermostat nudged one click at a time. Let's step into that cooling world as it starts to loosen. A stony plain sits under a pale sky. Far off, a blue-white wall of ice throws a faint glare, and somewhere near your boots, a steady drip ticks in the quiet. Your knees bend and your hand meets the ground. Gritty, cold silt coats your fingertips, the kind that feels like fine sand and soot mixed together. A smooth pebble rests in your other palm and begins to warm, small heat against the morning chill. A long thaw has started, and the edge of the ice softens into shelves and ledges. Meltwater threads run off the face, cut lines through gravel, and pool in shallow pans. The old cold feels like a heavy coat getting unbuttoned. A few hills away, small forager bands watch the open ground. Herds nose along the new grass at the margins, following smell and habit. Glaciers move slowly, but decisions don't. Camps shift with the food, fires go out and start again, and a path is weighed by talk and footprints. A wind lifts and carries the scent of wet stone. Ice clinks inside a melt channel, and tiny bubbles fizz through it as if the plain is breathing. People track where animals cross, test the crust with a stick, and mark a bend with a pile of stones, tracing routes that will matter when the seasons turn looser. A question hangs over the whole scene. Where will all this water go as the ice loosens? Excellent question. Some old river paths sit blocked by dead ice and ridges. Some valleys open like doors at certain points in summer. The melt prowls for the low spot, spreads into lakes behind ice walls, and then sneaks through a notch you could miss from a ridge. A dark stripe of moraine lines the front like a fallen rampart. Streams charge into it and split, then merge again with a louder murmur. Pools widen and then drain, leaving rings of silt and a shine of wet stones. Every trickle writes a line that will become a channel, then a path for fish, then a boundary that herds and people learn by heart. A bird lifts off the gravel and curls away toward the light. Ice calves with a soft groan, and a piece slides down into a tarn, sending a slow ripple to the edge. The pebble in your palm holds a little more warmth now, a hint that the morning is leaning forward. Low clouds move and open, and the surface of the ice brightens like a face turned toward the sun. The plain shows scars and ridges left by the last push, all useful to feet and hooves that want the firm way across. Melt turns dust into paste, sticks to your boots, and marks your steps in a line that will vanish by noon. A rustle comes from the scrub where ptarmigans skitter and freeze. The air smells clean and slightly metallic, like a fresh rain on metal tools. On the slope, a child watches from beside a woven basket, counting animals with a whisper and a tap of fingers, while an elder tests the ground where a stream undercuts the bank. A ridge of gravel crumbles where water bites at it, and a pale plume runs downstream. The ice front does not leap, it inches. Yet with each small melt, a new course opens, and a choice opens with it. Follow the quiet melt along the plain, and you can see rivers feeling for a path as the edge pulls back. First, let's see what happens as the ice starts to step back. Meltwater runs from the ice edge onto dark ledges. Sunlight winks on a trickle running over dark stone. A glassy glare sits on the wet rock, and the air carries a cool, mineral smell. Ice retreats unevenly across the map. Windward slopes lose their cover fast. Shaded gulches and high basins keep their ice far longer. Some pockets linger for centuries while open plains clear out. It was like a global freezer door left slightly ajar in spring. One valley can bloom, while the next still holds a frozen wall. Longer, brighter summers start to matter at the margins. Because longer, melt seasons thinned the edges, therefore the ice front drew back faster. The face gets undercut, then crumbles. Melt pools spread into shallow sheets, then gather into streams. Near the edge, the ground is a mess, soft and raw, prone to floods and collapses that rearrange paths overnight. Rock, soil, and the deep crust respond once the weight eases. Land lifts in slow motion, a finger's width in a lifetime in some places, less in others. Old shorelines tilt. River mouths shift. A bay becomes a meadow, and a meadow becomes a bay. Glaciers do patience. People do plans. New corridors open where ice once blocked the way. Valleys reveal passes. Low saddles connect basins. Grass and willow arrive fast, which draws herds into these routes. Reindeer and bison cut straight lines across gravel fans. Elk try the new edges of lakes that did not exist a few seasons ago. Foxes and wolves follow. This is how food webs move when doors open. Small forager bands travel with them. Families break camp when the ground firms, then circle back when berries ripen or fish run. Seasonal movement is the habit, and it fits the changing map. Flint blades ride at the hip, sharp and fixable. Simple projectiles take down lean animals that graze the first green, then heavier ones when the fat returns. A river valley with fresh silt means cattails and birds. A windy ridge means ground still too thin for a hut stake. Sheltered pockets are not just cold. They are traps for hikers and hunters. A snowfield crust can hold in the dawn and collapse at noon. A braided stream looks calm, and then shifts into a new braid while you watch. People learn the safe crossings by trying and by telling. Camps pick spots with higher ground, windbreaks, and a quick way out. Rebound does more than lift. It tilts travel. A beach that once led to clams dries into scrub, which invites deer but pushes seals away. A lake slides north against its shore, opening mudflats for geese. Canoes have to be dragged farther each year in some bays, while other inlets drown the old portage. Paths change even when the weather holds steady. Tools and knowledge adapt because the land keeps moving. A group that used to reach the caribou by one pass might switch to a river launch. Flint quarries near old ice lines become supply hubs. A few easy shapes cover many needs. You can score a blade on the knee, haft it with sinew, and be ready before the herd tops the ridge. Fires are small and quick, since wood is scattered and damp. A low breeze slides along the damp ground. Open space around a melting front looks wide, but it is risky. Groundwater pumps upward as the ice seal lifts. Hills slump. Ice-dammed ponds form in a day and overflow the next. People mark these zones in stories and detours. Elders note the safe bluff. Younger scouts test the floodplain only when the sky is clear and the crust holds a boot. Animals read the new map faster. They find the soft edges where chutes come first. Then their trails harden into routes that last generations. Human feet stamp beside those paths. Campsites repeat on gravel bars and on knolls above marshes. A single season can flip a valley from blockage to thoroughfare. That flip becomes the start of a tradition. Herds widen out as the ice pulls back and plants spread. and people widen with them. Shuttered, canyons switch to highways. A pass that once echoed with rockfall now rings with hooves and footfall. Corridors stretch from inland plains to new coasts where the tide has room to climb. Once water gets loose, it starts to hunt the fastest path, and the land quickly shows the marks. Let's follow that water as it finds rivers, gathers into lakes, and now and then makes trouble. A mud bank lifts you above a fast, chalky river under a gray sky. The current roars, and the air smells earthy with silt. Pebbles rattle faintly as the bank undercuts. Ice sits upstream like a wall, and water pools against it to make broad proglacial lakes. Because outlets were blocked by ice, therefore pressure rose until a lip failed, and a flood sprinted down the valley. Channels that looked steady at dusk could cut a new path by dawn. A braid that held for years could vanish in a night, and the valley woke to a different map. Some lakes were truly vast, and when they let go, they scoured wide tracks and left raw terraces. Mist beads on your forearms in the cold spray. Continental plumbing was being rerouted with a very large wrench. Rivers love a shortcut. Maps hate it. People kept camps near river bends where eddies offered fish, waterfowl, and firm landings. Curved banks gave shelter from wind and a view of the flow. Hide boats and simple rafts waited under willows for quick crossings. Every season could bring a fresh cut across a bend that used to be safe. A gravel bar could melt into a deep chute, or a creek could balloon into the main course overnight. Buried paths and markers vanished, and a crossing that took a minute turned into a half-day stalk upstream. Outburst floods could wipe low camps clean. Watchers learned to read trouble in a sudden, dull roar and a strange smell of wet clay. Families kept bundles tight and ready, and fire carried in coals, not logs, to move fast if the river rose. Terraces above the reach of common floods became the new habit. People learned the pulse of meltwater and wind, timing crossings for cold mornings, fishing for clearer afternoons, and travel for lower flow. Caches stayed on high benches, and boats were lifted to trees when the sky looked wrong. Elders tracked silt lines on stones, and the return of reeds to guess the next shift. Tools and routes adjusted with the water. Stakes marked safe fords until the channel slid again. Camps rotated with the bends, not out of whim, but because the river kept changing what it offered and what it took. A bend with driftwood one month might pack ice the next. Rivers, swollen with this moving store of ice water, still had one more job downstream. They ran to the sea, and the shoreline refused to hold still. Downstream, the real surprise waits where the river meets the ocean. The tide pushes over a broad flat, farther than last year. You taste salt on your lips and hear the slap of small waves on kelp, steady and small. A gull hangs in the wind over a new inlet. Wet sand gleams where grass used to grow. The high water mark creeps inland, and the old edge of the shore looks unsure. Warm water spreads across the wide continental shelves. Low plains and river mouths fill, and shallow valleys turn into bays and straits. Oceans hold more heat, and because warm water expands, therefore sea level rises even before fresh meltwater arrives. Added melt pushes levels higher in fits and spurts, uneven from place to place. Coasts pull back year by year. Imagine your neighborhood map updating weekly like a glitchy app. Shorelines don't leave forwarding addresses. The land bridge between Siberia and Alaska drowns in stages, and paths that once crossed it go quiet. the broad plain between Britain and Europe floods into shoals and channels many later sailors will learn the hard way. The shallow shelves around Southeast Asia sink under rising seas and islands separate by new straits. Camps and trails go under, and families mark the loss of camps and paths to creeping sea levels. People shift upslope or inland, yet they still work the margins. Coastal foraging diversifies. Nets, fishhooks, and baskets for shellfish become common gear, light and sturdy. These feeds turn into reliable staples in many places, steady, even when herds wander. The custom of timing foraging trips with tides becomes a daily clock, with dawn runs or moonlit walks set by water height. Hands pull wet rope, feet press into soft mud at low tide, then step back as water rises. Estuaries and lagoons offer new routes and new food. Encounters change as groups meet by launch sites and sandbars instead of old river crossings. Boats get more useful, and so do beaches that face the right currents. People adjust because the shore keeps moving, and habit turns into knowledge passed at fireside and on the walk home. Warmth builds along coasts, and lives lean into water's rhythm. Then, with a rude jolt, the climate turns sharply cold again. Take 3 slow breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Again, steady and easy. One more, unhurried and full. Breath leaves like a small cloud in cool air. Drop your shoulders. Let the weight sit where it belongs. Soften your brow and let your eyes rest. The room feels a little heavier, quiet and steady. Distant hush stands in for wind across water. Ice eased back across the land and shaped long corridors. Valleys opened, and water and feet found passage where walls of frost once stood. Rivers found shortcuts and cut new channels toward the sea. Coasts edged inland as the sea kept rising, swallowing low shores bit by bit. Old edges blurred into bays and marsh, and maps would have needed new lines. Those corridors guided herds and wanderers along fresh ground. Forager bands noticed the tilt of the ground and the mood of the water. Camp circles that sat near good reeds or a ford needed small shifts. Because shorelines shifted and valleys refilled, therefore camps that once worked had to move. People adjusted by a hill's width or to the other bank, keeping familiar paths within reach. Boats, where used, were beached a little higher each season. Fires still cooked the same roots and fish, just with the tents a touch farther from the evening tide. Imagine cool air crossing damp ground. It kisses bare ankles, smells faintly of wet stone. Mud keeps the trace of a heel and then relaxes. These changes moved at human speed. Grandparents told the story. Children watched the bank retreat, and life adjusted in steps. Not a cliff, more a slope you barely notice while you walk. Tools stayed familiar, routes stayed useful, and the skills still fit the land. The work was patient, and the days kept their rhythm. What felt sudden to the shoreline stretched across lifetimes in the camp circle. Then the pattern wobbles, and a short cold slip returns before the longer warming settles. Think of it like a pause between songs, quiet but noticeable. Breath gathers, the hush holds, and people pull cloaks a little tighter. Hold that calm as the air turns crisp again. A frosty dawn crusts the ground. A thin bite hangs in the air, and the quiet feels hollow. Your breath shows in small puffs. Frost sparkles on brittle grass at your feet. Fresh meltwater from the retreating ice poured into the North Atlantic. Many researchers think that flood of light water slowed the great conveyor that moves heat. Cold meltwater freshened the North Atlantic because it made the surface water less willing to sink. Therefore, the ocean sent less heat north. Regions downwind cooled fast, and winter stretched. The switch did not flip the same way everywhere. Some places cooled hard, others barely dipped, and parts of the South kept warming. Studies point to ocean patterns and ice sheet pulses, but the exact mix is still debated. It felt like someone hit an awkward undo on spring. Winter asked for an encore. People leaned on layered hides and steady hearths for warmth. Wood smoke threads thinly through clear air. Hearthstones held heat, and shelters were tucked against wind. Food plans flexed with the chill. Families widened their menus to include more small game, fish, and tough greens when they could find them. Stored roots carried camps through cold snaps. The risk of short growing seasons and resource swings pushed careful timing. Sharing networks between neighboring bands mattered more. People met at safe crossings to swap dried foods, hides, and news. A band that lacked berries could trade bone points or firewood. Knowledge moved with the goods, from roots to snow-free springs. Movements shifted too. Some groups rode out the freeze near coasts where tides fed shellfish. Others shadowed herds along open steppe, pockets. River travel gained value where ice thinned early, and caches marked safe return spots in lean months. Tools and choices followed the weather. Snares and fish weirs did more work when larger game kept to windswept ridges. Bark containers served as light storage when camps moved often. Risk spread across places, foods, and friends, so no single bad week broke the year. Across this stretch, few groups vanished outright. Trade ties, storage, and flexible skills kept many communities steady enough to wait out the swings. The mix of cooperation and know-how buffered the shock for many, and that kept skills alive for the next warm nudge. As the chill eased, shrubs crept higher, then pine and birch followed. New shade closed over clearings, and wetlands gathered at low spots. Hunters had to aim for different pathways, and fires asked for drier fuel. The cold steppe was passing, and the trees began to walk in, slowly. I traced massive but fading hoofprints along a damp meadow. A faint, sweet grass smell hangs here, and a distant insect buzz threads the air as the prints soften in the warming ground. Warming air and shifting plants break up ranges. Ice pulls back, lakes spread, and new wetlands and forests cut old paths. Herds that once roamed wide now find thickets, rivers, and cliffs in the way. Hunters are skillful, and they follow, because giant animals breed slowly and need wide feeding grounds, therefore short windows to recover, leave them exposed to change and chase. Causes differ by place, and the timing is still studied, but the stress piles up in many regions. Losing megafauna was like losing big batteries and relying on a lot of AAs. A mammoth or a giant sloth once gave dense calories in one bold effort. Smaller game, fish, shellfish, roots, and seeds take more trips and more hands. That was the trade-off of losing large, calorie-dense prey. Small meals add up if you keep moving. Finer projectile points show up in camps and along riverbanks. Light shafts carry these points into quick deer and lean antelope that dart through brush. Traps tighten the net around small animals, with snares, deadfalls, and pit covers placed on well-worn paths. Fishing gear grows varied, with hooks, lines, baskets, and prongs for spearing. Grinding stones and mortars sit nearby as plant processing becomes daily work. A scatter of small bones dries on a flat stone. Communal processing of meat, fish, and seeds turns many small catches into shared meals and stored food. Thin smoke drifts from racks as strips cure. Pestles thud in steady rhythm, and the stone warms under the sun. People spread labor across the group, which steadies dinner when any one thing runs thin. Fish weirs turn moving water into food. Water riffles over stakes set in a stream. Nets and basket traps wait where fish funnel, and hands pull them up when the run peaks. Barbed points pick off stragglers. The work takes planning, but it invites teamwork and timing along the bank. Diets diversify as hunters, fishers, and gatherers lean into variety. More sources mean fewer empty weeks when one species fails. Stored seeds, dried fish, and smoked meat hold value that travels, and sharing smooths luck between families. Risk spreads across more reliable, smaller resources, and meals become steady rather than grand. Spreading forests, rework travel, and hunting. Stone edges shift toward narrow blades for cutting vines and carving wood. Shafts shorten to move through brush, and traps favor shaded paths. Fires open small clearings and help nuts, berries, and tender shoots thrive, and people learn which trees answer to heat and which do not. Follow the trees as they start to rewrite how life works. At the edge of mixed woods, dappled light freckles damp soil. A low opening shows where careful hands keep the forest honest. Resin sticks to your fingers from a fresh cut. A green, loamy smell hangs in the quiet. As trees spread after the cold eased, the canopy closed and travel slowed. Hunters learn to stalk in shade and wait at edges. Paths along ridges and riverbanks carried farther than straight lines through brush. Along broad rivers, dugout canoes turned heavy loads into smooth trips. Trails tightened under the branches. Because forests thickened, therefore people needed heavier axes, planned fires, and different tactics. An axe bit gleams dull in mottled shade. Stalking gave way to ambush at clearings and crossings. Moving camp meant light bundles and tools that could do more than one job. Microlith bladelets clipped into composite tips for arrows and knives, quick to repair if a point snapped in brush. Ground stone axes bit cleanly into trunks and limbs, and they kept working after many sharpenings. Woodlands don't negotiate. They get trimmed. Controlled burning-shaped habitat edges, opened sight lines, and refreshed chutes for browsing animals. Charred twigs snap underfoot near a cleared patch. It was like upgrading from a Swiss Army knife to a full toolbox. Waterways turned into quiet highways that flowed through the trees. Nets, weirs, and hooks worked the bends where shade met current. Boats ferried firewood, stone, and catch between camps without squeezing through miles of thicket. Camps hugged edges where meadow, stream, and forest touched, because that is where choices stack up. Even the sounds shifted by the edge, softer and steadier than open, plain wind. The managed patchwork opened new niches. Hazelnuts and acorns filled baskets in fall, and deer browsed on fresh growth near burned edges. Fish crowded in shaded runs where driftwood pooled the flow. People dried berries, roasted nuts, and cached plant foods for later. The trade-off was clear. More food carried across seasons, and more hours spent cracking, soaking, and grinding to make it ready. Microliths shaped the hunt. Ground axes shaped the trees, and fires shaped the margins, and together they shaped the day. These habits leaned toward a new idea. Edges got tended, shoots got encouraged, and useful spots were kept useful on purpose. When you already prune, clear, and return to the same patches. Gardening is not a leap so much as a step. The move from gathering plenty to planting on purpose was smaller than it seems. Inhale for 4. Hold for a small beat. Let the air go for 6. Let your shoulders drop. Feel your jaw unclench again. A light breeze threads through leaves overhead, and the sound is low and even. Big animals had thinned across many valleys. People leaned on a wider mix. They turned to small game, fish and mussels, nuts and seeds, and roots by the water. Think of it like switching from one big paycheck to many smaller gigs. Toolkits matched the woods. Tiny microliths in wooden shafts made sharp edges. Stone axes cleared trunks and limbs. Forests spread as the air warmed bit by bit. A quiet rustle of leaves becomes your white noise. Sun-warm bark feels dry under your hand. Because each shift came in steps, therefore parents could teach children habits that fit the new woods. Elders told where springs held late water. Children learned the season for shoots and the bend in the path where deer paused. Forest edges opened into patches by design. People set low, careful fires that shaped those borders and fed fresh growth. Thin smoke hung in cool air. Berries and grazing returned to the strips. Paths stayed easy to walk. Microliths and axes stayed busy at these edges. A light breeze pushed the last hint of ash into the canopy. Then the birds came back. Rivers and shores offered steady work. Nets and hooks met the current, while baskets shook out seeds from dry heads. Camps shifted with the seasons, but hovered near familiar groves. Hearths turned small catches and gathered plants into warm meals. Grinding stones pressed grainy meals smooth enough for soups, and the day felt full, but steady. Steady warming kept the woods familiar year by year. Seeds spilled near camps and sprouted where ash had sweetened the soil. People noticed which plants liked the light and the loose ground, so they nudged them, watered a bit, protected shoots. Sprouts came back where seed heads had been tossed, and some spots grew rich with repeats. What started as gathering and guiding starts to seem obvious. Now, watch those first careful gardens take root. A small plot sits beside a low camp of hides and brush. Shallow lines are scratched into soft soil. The smell of damp earth rises after a thin night mist. A child presses a stick straight while an elder drops a few tough grains in. Families save seed from the last harvest, set aside in dry baskets near the hearth. Bigger kernels look worth the space, and stalks that keep their heads get noticed. Over years, patient hands favor plants that drop less and swell more. Seasonal tending turns into custom. Someone weeds and guards. Calmer seasons settle over the valley after hard swings faded. Because the climate is steadier and the rains come in a loose pattern, therefore people can return to the same plot and repeat the same choices, and the small shifts add up. Farming was like switching from pay-as-you-go to a subscription plan. The plot asks for steady work. Weeding rises with the first warm days. The weeds didn't get the memo. Birds watch the rows, and hands shoo them away. Flint sickles bite the stalks at harvest, their edge set with sharp little teeth. Grinding stones sit close by. Arms push and turn for a long while. Baskets fill, and chaff lifts in a small golden cloud. Grain dust clings to forearms and cheeks. Pits get dug in firm ground near the camp. A hand-pressed pit lid thumps softly closed. Simple granaries lift food above damp and pause. Storage lowers risk from a stormy week, yet it carries its own bad luck. Surplus finally shows on good years in small piles with more labor in every season. Meals grow more regular and trade items appear, such as a spare skin or a pinch of salt. The risk of crop failure, pests, and storage loss hangs over the ledger. Mice nibble, and insects find cracks, and wet months push mold. Families plan feasts and set limits to stretch grain through lean spells. Feast and famine become a problem to manage. Where food stays put, people start to stay put too. Paths harden between plots and hearths. Light fences or walls appear to keep goats out. Neighbors swap grain for fish or stone. As surplus builds, walls, footpaths, and trade start to follow. A clustered village court sits ringed by storage rooms. Storage bins, pots, and woven baskets line the walls, neat and useful. A warm cereal smell hangs in the air, soft and steady. Quiet footfall moves across packed earth. Sunlight stripes a wall through woven mats. Stored grain and dried roots carry meals past the hungry months. Families count on steady bowls, not just lucky days. Hands that do not chase food each dawn can grind, weave, or plan. Because surplus fills storage bins, therefore larger groups can stay put and coordinate work and time. Roles settle in with the walls. You see roles like elders, craft specialists, or ritual leaders, and each has a job that lasts beyond the day. An elder hears two neighbors argue and picks a calm middle. A craft specialist shapes a blade and a neat pot rim. A ritual leader watches the sky and sets the next gathering. Paths link house to house and message to message. The group chat got crowded and needed moderators. A sweep day gets set, a roof party follows, and the court feels smaller. People can meet more often than the seasons alone allow. Crowding carries a price. The trade-off of crowding, sanitation challenges, and disputes sits right beside the steady stews. Water at the edges grows murky after a busy day, and tempers do too. A corner smells stale when the sun is high, and voices rise, then fall. When food stays, gossip does too. Exchange lines stretch outward as mornings repeat. Stone, shells, and pigments move far from their sources, carried by feet and promises. A stranger arrives with hard green rock for axes and leaves with salt cakes and dye. Simple conflict management and ritual roles help keep these meetings smooth enough. Footprints overlap in fine dust between doorways. The village links to a wider pattern you can trace backward. Ice withdrew and left water. Water filled valleys and fed tall reeds and fish-rich shallows. People read those new rhythms, saved the reliable parts, and planted where it made sense. Fields took root close to ovens. Ovens sat close to sleeping rooms. Houses pulled into clusters that grew into towns. It is a long fuse that runs from ice to water to fields to towns. The quiet start of what we call civilization. Now step back from the court as the evening coals dim and the last bowl is rinsed. The cereal smell thins and the footfalls grow rare. The fan hush of this long story fades to the soft mix of your own room. Let the noise ease away and come back to your quiet room with the long story settled. The room is still again. Let your ears settle on the simplest sound nearby. Maybe the low hush of a fan or a tiny click in the wall and the slow in and out of your breath. Nothing asks for your attention now. The day can wait outside. You are safe in this quiet. Small turns in climate set a quiet chain in motion that pulled ice back, sent water onward, trimmed old coasts, remixed forests and herds, and guided people toward seeds, hearths, and the first steady towns. Thank you for spending the evening here. Your time is a gentle gift in a busy world, and I'm glad you shared it. If you feel like it, leave a sleepy note about where you'd travel in time, any stop at all. If this helped you unwind, a soft like and a subscribe are welcome. They tell me to keep making calm nights like this. Unclench your jaw. Let your tongue rest on the floor of your mouth. Soften your shoulders and let the hands grow heavy. Let your eyes grow warm and heavy, with lids that want to close. We'll meet again for more slow history next time. For now, drift as you are, right here in your quiet room. Good night.